Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another modding tutorial for space engineers. This episode is going to be an introduction to rocket turrets. Rocket, Gatling, and interior turrets are quite similar in design to one another, so anything you learn on one, you can mostly apply to the others. The first thing you should do is head over to the Keen Software House forums and download the zip file I've provided that contains a working example of a rocket turret. Contained files include the blend file you see on screen presently, as well as all the text, texture, and other such files necessary to create your own working rocket turret. I do encourage you to create your own 3D models while following along, but keep in mind that all of the scaling and orientation present in the blend file I've provided will make sure that everything looks, aims, and shoots properly. Please keep in mind that this is not a Blender modeling tutorial. What I will include is anything necessary to make sure your model works within the Space Engineers environment. In the description below is a link to a wonderful series of Blender tutorials by BornCG, and should be more than sufficient enough to get you started down the modeling path. Rocket turrets differ in a few aspects. For example, they don't have an extra empty to assign a spinning barrel, like the Gatling turret. You can also have multiple barrels that can be fired from, and their empty names are different from the other two turret types. Here are a few things to keep in mind when working on a rocket turret. They're comprised of three parts. The first is the static base, second is the lateral or yaw section, and lastly is the vertical or pitch section, which is also the barrels. This means that you'll have three separate MWMs that make up the turret in the end, excluding the construction or LOD stages. Without extra scripting, there is only one collision mesh that applies only to the static base piece. This is the method we'll be using as it is the least likely to run into any issues from update to update. With extra scripting, thanks to Phoenix 84, we can actually have collision mesh on the barrel and lateral section. I only suggest using this method if you feel like it would add something to the model, such as a large capital ship turret. And finally, you can have usable conveyor ports and terminals. With all of that out of the way, let's move on to the blend file. Here you can see there are a lot of pieces that comprise a single turret. You can see three separate scenes, each one refers to an MWM that you'll have once you export, as well as any extra LODs or construction models. The first scene is the static base piece, which is our main object. You can see the name of most of the objects is also the name of the scene. I do this so that if I ever need to append from a previous file, or I have many scenes in one blend file, I can easily locate what piece it is I'm trying to work with, and I don't run into any errors with duplicates. From the top, we have the main object. This is the static base piece. You can also see that there are several children assigned to it. These children are assigned to the main object for the purpose of that highlighted glow you see on the object in game. From the names you can see here, there is a conveyor and a terminal that has been added to the turret. The name of these objects is fixed and must remain this way or they will not work as intended. If you want to add another terminal, for example, you just increase the 000 at the end to 001 after duplicating the object for both the empty and the mesh. The empty or dummies are what denote the area that you can look at in-game to interact with the respective object. The mesh section is actually what you see in-game. The empties actually reference the mesh section under the data tab. This is necessary so that the highlighted mesh works. If the names or the reference isn't done properly, then when you look at the object in-game, you will see a yellow box instead of that highlighted glow. All of these objects are contained on layer 1. The next object is on layer 2. It is the collision mesh denoted by the _COL. Ideally, you want to keep this as simple as possible. You'll either want to use primitives or a very simplified mesh. Once you've designed your simplified mesh, you just head over to the Physics tab and click on Rigid Body. From there, you don't have to do anything else, and you'll be left with a simple convex hull-based collision mesh. Concave shapes are not supported. If you want to design something with a concave shape collision, such as a tube corridor, you'll have to make multiple collision objects, such as one for the floor, another for the ceiling, and two for the left and right walls. All of these will be contained on layer 2. The next object is _camera. This is here so we can actually render an image for our icon. This can be on any layer, but I highly suggest putting it on one of the last layers that aren't actually used. For the purpose of this blend file, I put it on layer 20. Then on layer 3 is the underscore mount points. You generate this automatically by going to the Create tab on the left side here, then clicking Mount Points. I rename it to what it is here, so I can easily find out which model it belongs to should I append anything from this file. You enter Edit mode and change the mount point mesh to what it is you need. You can have multiple mount point meshes on a single side to have more complex or exact mount point setup. Do keep in mind that any mount point mesh that you create needs to be square in shape. Otherwise, it will not generate the proper information on export. Next, we have the two construction models, underscore con.000 and underscore con.001. These are on layer 11 for stage 1 and layer 12 for stage 2. I have no stage 3 on this, but that would go on layer 13. I do, however, highly suggest that at least a single construction stage is added, or else you might run into some weird issues when building the block in survival mode if you have no extra construction stage. The plugin, without any editing, only supports 3 construction stages in a single scene, but that can be changed through node editing, but I will not be covering that in this tutorial set. Next, you can see 2 models with fake added to the end. These are for the purpose of modeling the turret how I want it to look and for rendering the icon image. If exported in their present state, they will not align properly in-game. Also note that these are on layer 20 to prevent them from being exported. Lastly, you can see the empty here named subpart underscore missile turret base 1. This name cannot be changed or the game will not be able to find it. Where the dummy is located is the pivot point as well as the origin point for the next piece. If this isn't set properly, then you could have a turret piece that isn't properly placed in-game. For the purpose of this model, I have simply centered and lowered the empty by ½ meter. Under the Data tab, the name of the next scene is placed into the Link to File section with the underscore large added to it, as that'll be added by the export function automatically. Now with the first scene out of the way, we'll move on to scene 2. This is the next piece of the turret that provides lateral or yaw movement. The model here is centered, as you can see from the transforms. The origin point of this mesh is actually the pivot point, and this will snap to the subpart of the previous piece, the static base mesh. The next object is an empty, subpart underscore missile turret barrels. This empty will have a reference to the next scene as with the previous subpart, under the Data tab. As you can see, the empty is placed in the center of the grooved section where the barrels will sit. Moving on to the final scene, this is the vertical or pitch section, also known as the barrels. Here you can see that we're following the same placement rule as the previous subpart, where the barrel's origin point is centered at 0, 0, 0. As a reminder, if your model isn't centered like this, it will not look proper in-game. The last pieces here are the muzzle empties. This is where the missiles will be fired from, and you can have as many as you want as far as I'm aware. I've done a model with 200 muzzles before, and it worked, so I'm not aware of any sort of cap that you can actually have. As you can see here, they're centered to the individual barrels. As you can see, they are also numbered from 1 to 8. This is the numbered order in which they will actually fire, going from 1 to 8 and then back to 1. As for a tip when creating your own rocket turret, I highly suggest starting with a single scene, then modeling the turret how you want it to look, comprised of the 3 parts, then create the 2 additional scenes. Then you can duplicate the mesh to the new scenes by dragging and dropping. Once you do this, you need to unlink the 2 meshes so that if you change the location of the barrels on the main scene, it doesn't actually change the location of them on the barrel scene. To unlink the objects, you select the necessary object, then with the cursor in the 3D viewport, you press U and then D to unlink the object in data. It will add a .000 to your new unlinked object, and you just change that to what you need it to be, and you're done. You'll be able to put this new object wherever without moving the object on the other scene. If you do change the mesh, however, you'll have to delete the old mesh that's on the scene that you didn't edit, and then repeat the previous process of duplicating and unlinking. The next file we're looking at is the CubeLux SBC that came in the zip file. Most everything here is pretty straightforward and shared with many blocks. Some things to note, however, are the definition actually has a bit more code added to it from some of the base blocks. This is necessary for the block to work properly, so make sure you have it added if you're not just copy-pasting code from the game CubeLux file. We have a different type ID as well. You should have large missile turret, since we're creating a rocket turret. I don't know why they went with missile, since the projectiles don't actually home in. From there, we have a bunch of familiar content. The display name, icon, cube size, model, components, and so forth. None of this is different for a rocket turret, so you can expect to see this on every model that you work on. A bit of new information that I haven't covered in any videos yet is the voxel placement bit. This more or less dictates how much of the blocks is allowed to be inside of a voxel and still be placed, or how much of it has to actually be inside of the voxel for it to be considered inside of it, which is important to be able to have a static base like a space station that doesn't move. Then again, we have some more familiar content, such as the build progress models or construction stages, the mount points, block pair name, edge type, and build time in seconds. Then we have overlay texture. This is what you'll see in-game when you're actually looking through the turret camera and trying to shoot at things through it. So, for example, we're using the vanilla one here that has those little scan lines across of it that everybody hates so much. Weapon definition ID controls what the turret is actually shooting. This links to the weapons.sbc file, but we're just going to go ahead and stick with the vanilla rocket turret values here. Inventory max volume is how much space it has. You can tweak this to a specific number so it holds the exact amount of ammo you want it to. Damage effect ID is the particle effect should it be damaged. So if the thruster is damaged, it'll have the smoke effect. If the reactor is damaged, it'll have that green smoke. If a solar panel is damaged, it'll have the lightning going around it. That's what this controls. Damaged sound is what the sound will be when the turret enters a damaged state. So it could be an explosion or whatever it is you set it to. Resource sync group is probably not going to change for most everyone, so we'll just leave this as it is now. Here we have the minimum maximum elevation, which is controlling how much it can aim up or aim down. Minimum maximum azimuth is more or less controlling how far it can aim left or right. With the values that are set here, we should be able to aim the turret perfectly straight up, perfectly straight down, and be able to spin a full 360 degrees. Idle rotation dictates whether or not it'll aim in random directions while not actively shooting things. You can still turn this off in game through the control panel as you can with all the other turrets. Max range is how far the turret can see and shoot at things, but it's not the max distance of the projectile. This is taken care of in the ammos.sbc, which is referenced from the weapons.sbc. Rotation and elevation speed is how fast it can turn around or aim up and down. These are two separate numbers, so you can actually make it so you can spin around really fast, but aim up and down really slow. The next is emissive color preset. This is what dictates the colors the block will use, much like how conveyors and other blocks will be green when they're working, and if they get damaged or turned off, they'll turn red, and then if they have no power, they'll turn black. We're using the vanilla set for default right now, but if you wanted to see what other vanilla presets there are, you can go to the emissivcolors.sbc. You can also make your own color preset if you want to go ahead and do that. And the final ones are FOV, or field of view. These more or less translate to zoom, if you will. A smaller field of view acts like a zoom effect. while a higher field of view typically acts like a fisheye lens. I believe this is affected by the field of view that you have set in your options. So a value of 0.1 in this file, and if your FOV is set to 70 degrees, translates to a minimum FOV of 7 degrees. And then this green bar that's going across that says small ship grid, this is commented out section where I have a divider line keeping my large blocks and small blocks separate from one another. When I'm trying to find the top of the small blocks set or the bottom of the large blocks set, I could just find this green line real quick and go from there. You don't have to have it. I use it because sometimes I'll have a whole bunch of blocks and it's just easier to have that line separating it. That's easy to find when scrolling through fairly quick. Alright, so now we're going to look at the last SBC that we're going to look at for this video. This is the block categories SBC. This more or less controls the tabs that are in the block menu when you're looking at the various blocks. And you can set this up in a number of different ways. We have the display name. This is the name that you will see in-game. So you want this to be something intelligible that people will be able to understand. You can either do your name or follow along with how the vanilla way is set up. And then the name underneath that is the more or less sorting name. You don't actually see this, but you could set it to whatever you want it to be. So if you were to have a Z in front of it, for example, it'll push your tab all the way to the bottom. Or if you put an A, it'll push your tab all the way to the top. I suggest trying to keep it with alphabetical order with everybody else because it's just easier to read that way, but it's up to you. Then you can see the string. It's the type ID of the block, and then it's the subtype ID of the block. So if I was to add a small turret, we'd have large missile turret, and then slash example rocket turret base 0 _ small, and that will be another entry into our tab that we're creating, or if you're putting it anywhere. Alright, well that wraps up this video. I'll do more in-depth videos of all the individual pieces in the future, like I did with older videos, but I wanted to get this out as a quick reference guide to all the pieces of a rocket turret. I didn't cover a lot of aspects of the modding process to try to keep the video time down, and I've already covered a lot of it fairly well in my previous videos. I have, however, changed how it is I do some things while modding Space Engineers, and so I'll try to make sure I do those videos in the future to better explain all the different little things I do now. It is likely that the zip file will change in the future, or I'll make like an advanced zip file, I guess, that has more aspects of the modding process that we can do, such as ammo and sounds and stuff like that. As always though, you can find me on the Keen Software House Discord server with a link on the forums to join that if you're not a part of it. You can also message me on here on YouTube, and I'll try to respond to everyone. I also have my forum thread that I've created a new one for, and if you want to communicate with me through there, you can do that as well. Links will be in the description to everything that's been referenced in this video down in the description below, so be sure you check that out as well. Until then, you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.